surgically treatable ocular surface disorder. Therefore, it's very relevant to all of us, and all of us, perform a good pterygium surgery, but we're going to discuss the fewer, finer nuances of pterygium surgery here. And before I go on for the rest of the sessions, we have with us our guest speaker, Dr. Dalia Syed, and she's in a bit of a rush, so we're going to let her go first. She's a cornea and external disease specialist, and she has come all the way from UK, from Nottingham University Hospital, to be here with us. And she's also the lead in emergency services, and she takes care of ocular emergencies as well. So before I welcome the other members for this instruction course, can we have Dr. Dalia Syed, please? And she would like to talk to us today on how to prevent and treat recurrence of pterygium.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It's really my pleasure and honor to be here today, my first trip to India, and it's been really very exciting. So I'm going to speak about how to prevent and treat recurrence. Recurrence is more commonly in fleshy pterygium, those with higher vertical heights, and with older techniques of removal, such as the Bayer sclera techniques, which shows up to 25% more increase in recurrence than if you do an autoconjunctival graft. So if you have an atrophic pterygium and you can see the episcleral vessels and it's quiet, leave alone. So let the sleeping tiger sleep, because otherwise it can come back with a vengeance. So when do we remove pterygium? If it's affecting the visual axis, or if it is progressive, or if you have astigmatism or any restriction of eye movement, or even cosmetic for the patient's request. So this is the gold standard technique of removal of pterygium. So this is here we cut the pterygium head and neck, and we have to really extend very much and remove all the fibrovascular tissue. It's not enough to remove the head and neck. Then we remove a very thin layer of autoconjunctival graft, and we seal it with tissue glue. So we put the thick part of the glue on the back of the conjunctival graft and the thin in the bed, and then with two tying forceps we move the conjunctival graft to the bed and make sure we stick it also to the remaining host conjunctiva. We can still use fibrin glue to glue also the area where we've taken the autoconjunctival graft. And with this technique, there is no sutures, there is no time in removing sutures, much less irritation from the needles from the suture, and much less recurrence. You can potentially put mitomycin C 0.04% if they are African race, or if there are recurrence. You see, very important to also glue the edge of the host conjunctiva to the autoconjunctival graft. So when do you use amniotic membrane? We use amniotic membrane very rarely in pterygium surgery, only if you have a very big epithelial defect. If you have, for instance, a large pterygium with a nasal and a temporal head. And it is recommended now that even if you have to use amniotic membrane, you better use a small part of autoconjunctival graft and stick it on top of the amnion, so that you don't leave a large bare area, because it's a much higher recurrence rate. And this is a patient example of a patient where I had to use amniotic membrane, and you can see here the patient 2 weeks after, and then within a month the patient had recurrence. So in 2017, there was a Cochrane review comparing conjunctival autograft with amniotic membrane transplantation, and in 20 randomized controlled trials showed that in primary pterygium at 6 months, the recurrence rate of conjunctival autograft is about up to 16.7%, while with amniotic membrane it is much higher, up to 42.3%. And if you are doing a recurrent pterygium and using an amniotic autoconjunctival graft, you reduce the recurrence rate by 55% than if you use an amniotic membrane. So clearly, huge difference between using an autoconjunctival graft or an amniotic membrane. And now, fibrin glue we use now routinely in the UK and most Western countries, although it is a little bit expensive, but you can use it for many patients. It is easier, very short surgical time, and it has been documented that it shows less recurrence. Some people do use autologous blood instead of fibrin glue, and that has been effective. However, the recurrence rate is still higher with autologous blood than with fibrin glue, but it is cheaper, and there is a higher risk of displacement or loss of the graft. Up to now, we've never lost a graft when using fibrin glue. And this is the healing of the autoconjunctival graft. This has been published, and you can see here there is a reperfusion injury. So there is a swelling of the graft in the first few days after you put the graft in with glue. And you can see areas of hemorrhages, areas of widening of the blood vessels, areas of ischemia, but eventually this all settles down. And these are examples of the patients with 1 week. Sometimes you have retraction a little bit, and you don't want this, but it usually even settles down. And you saw even atrophic areas in the graft like this. We don't know whether this will affect the recurrence rate or not, but so far we've not had any problems with the autoconjunctival graft. People have tried to use limbal stem cell transplantation in pterygium surgery. In our opinion, this is not necessary because you've got the rest of the stem cells which are working, and when you do stem cell transplantation, you need only 2 clock hours to repopulate the whole surface. So there is really no need to disturb the limbus in autoconj graft. There was a paper in 2008 published by a group from Australia which showed this perfect for pterygium, where they do extensive excision of pterygium up to even remodeling the plica, and the recurrence rate is very, very low, up to 1.6% after 1 year, which is really quite remarkable. So adjuvant, we do use periocular intraoperative MMC. We don't like intraoperative MMC. We have to wash it very well. We can use 0.02 to 0.4%, 5 minutes. And it's very important to put it under the conjunctival edge, not just only on the sclera, and we wash it very carefully. But we don't like to inject it preoperative. We use it intraoperative. We don't like to inject it preoperative because there has been reports of scleral melts and ciliary shutdown with the use of perioperative MMC. However, we do use very much other topical anti-VEGFs and 5-FU, which is the gold standard technique now that we use in recurrence, and it's very good to reduce the fibrosis as well as the angiogenesis. We've published this paper that we treat the primary pterygium actually with injections of 5-FU even before we think of doing the surgery. It arrests the progression. Sometimes patients will come and say it's cosmetically acceptable now, we don't need the pterygium to be removed, and if you have to remove it, actually you get much less bleeding, much less need to hook the medial rectus, so it has a lot of advantages. And you can see here this patient's pre and post, and the ones we've taken out after multiple injections of 5-FU showed that reduce of all anti-angiogenic and antifibrotic agents in the tissue. So how do we treat recurrence? First, it is very important to recognize conjunctival recurrence. So you can see the redness and inflammation, vascularization here, which is telling you that there is a start of a conjunctival recurrence. And it can rarely come from under the autoconj graft, but usually in the back or at the edges from here and there. And it's very important to treat the patient at this stage and not to wait at a much bigger stage. And this is, you don't really want to get to this stage before you start treating your recurrence. And this is a patient who had 5th time recurrence. Our standard protocol now is injection of 5-FU at the slit lamps, about 0.1 to 0.2 mil of 2.5 milligrams per mil 5-fluorouracil under the conjunctiva. And patients usually need about 4 doses, and they settle down completely, as in this patient. Now that patient, they've tried to do many, many operations for, even did a stem cell localized transplantation, but he had massive recurrence with fibrosis and with restriction of movement. But once we've started doing this 5-FU at the slit lamp, we brought the patient back, operated on the patient, and even put these stay sutures to reform the fornix. And then, because he had such a very strong scarring effect, you can see here very large autoconj graft, but eventually ended up with granuloma. And we knew that patient will have a recurrence. So when he had his recurrence, we started giving him injections of 5-FU, and he settled completely, as you can see here, with 4 doses of subconj 5-fluorouracil. And his son came with the same problem. Again, he had 3 injections of 5-fluorouracil and settled completely. His recurrence settled completely. And you can see here. So we published that. We had 15 eyes of 14 patients, and since that paper, we've done many more, where we injected the 5-FU intralesion at the slit lamp repeatedly every week, and we give steroids in between. And in those 12 eyes, one patient only needed 8 injections, but most of them needed less than 3 injections, and 93% showed clinical improvement and regression and arrest of the recurrence. So in summary, medical treatment for primary pterygium with intralesional injection of 5-FU is an option to reduce the vascularity and thinning out of the pterygium. You may not even need to do it, and if you do it, the surgery is much easier. The gold standard technique for removal of pterygiums is excision with the autoconjunctival graft. It is very important to recognize and treat conjunctival recurrence before it comes on the cornea, because it's always been known in the past that recurrence means when the pterygium comes back on the cornea, but you really don't want to wait that long and you want to catch it early. And 5-FU has been very effective in managing recurrence with we've not had any complications reported from it. So as Professor Dura always tells me, there is nothing new under the sun, but the sun is constantly shedding new lights on new object. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Syed, for that wonderful talk. I would like to know from you, do you regularly use mitomycin C in cases of primary pterygia? If you see a very fleshy pterygium, do you have specific indications where you'd like to use intraoperative mitomycin C?
Well, we don't use it because we have the Caucasian patients in most of them. We don't use it in primary pterygium unless unless it's African Caribbean. There are other risk factors. The patient has a recurrence, then we use. But primary pterygiums, we don't use 5-FU.
Yeah, so I think I completely agree with you. Just a good meticulous subconjunctival dissection of all the tissue actually helps in preventing recurrence, and that itself does a very good job.
Yes, absolutely.
So, do we have any questions for Dr. Syed from the audience? All right, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you.
So next, I would like to talk about the history, pathophysiology, and overview of surgical techniques. So, you know, before we go into detail about management of any case for that matter, or any topic that we come across, it is very important for us to understand the basic pathophysiology behind the disease. So that's what we're going to start with. All right, so before we go on to talk about the surgical management, let's take a brief look at the history of pterygium. So the word pterygium actually comes from the Greek word pterygion, and the surgery has been performed for over more than 3,000 years. Although a very primitive kind of a surgery was done initially, and even all sorts of cleansing medications were used to so-called melt the pterygium, like acids, vinegar, ginseng, were used way back to take care of small pterygia. Now we have come a long way since then, and in the last 50 years we've had a lot of advancement when it comes to pterygium surgery. So as we all know, pterygium affects the older age group, and it is more commonly formed in the warm and dry climates. The peri-equatorial region is rightly called the pterygium belt, and this is because the main risk factor for causation of pterygium is the chronic ultraviolet radiation exposure. There are various other risk factors that have been implicated, and one of them is genetic predisposition, which can include hereditary defects in DNA repair mechanism. Whether chronic inflammation or irritation at the limbal area really causes pterygium or not, the evidence regarding this is still inconclusive. And there are a lot of viruses which have also been included in the pathogenesis, most common of these being the human papilloma virus. Now, what really happens is that this UVB radiation causes release of reactive oxygen species, which leads to oxidative stress. Now, this actually leads to a pro-inflammatory mechanism. This upregulates interleukins, causes matrix metalloproteinase activation, and growth factor receptor activation. This, in turn, causes damage to the stem cells and leads to their proliferation, cell migration. Again, inflammatory infiltrates are attracted, and there is extracellular matrix remodeling, which eventually causes pterygium. Now, these matrix metalloproteinases actually invade the Bowman's layer, and that is the reason why the fleshy pterygium tissue, which consists of fibroblasts and blood vessels along with the epithelium, invades the Bowman's and can lead to residual scarring. Even when we treat the pterygium, a lot of cases, because it has gone down to the corneal stroma, we do have some amount of corneal scarring, which we can inform the patient preoperatively. Also, the presence of these histopathologically, when we see these inflammatory cells, that tells us there is an inflammation which has a role to play when it comes to pterygium. Now, recurrent pterygium is slightly different in pathogenesis as compared to the primary pterygium. There is much more fibroblastic activation, more cellular proliferation, and more collagen production. And that is the reason why our dissection needs to be even more meticulous when we talk about recurrent pterygium. A few other terms that we should know: pseudopterygium, or it is basically a partial stem cell deficiency. Most commonly, if there's an ocular burn or an insult at a particular site, this can lead to pseudopterygium. Now, this can happen at any site. So the ways where we can differentiate that there is some underlying pathology and it is not just a simple pterygium is that it need not be nasal or temporal. It can happen at any site. It may be associated with symblepharon, and we need to ask the patient in detail whether he's had any incident before this. Now, pinguicula is exactly the same pathogenesis as pterygium. It is just that when it is limited to conjunctiva and it does not encroach upon the cornea, we call this as pinguicula. Pterygium can also be classified depending on whether it is nasal, temporal, or double-headed. Now, nasal pterygium is much more common because of the concentration of UV light. How the UV light falls on the limbus is such that the nasal limbus has a concentration of more than 20 times as compared to temporal limbus, and that's the reason why we have more commonly nasal pterygiums. Now, this is a slit lamp grading system. Basically, we just need to see how fleshy the pterygium is. So if you look at the T1 stage, we can clearly see the episcleral vessels, otherwise known as the atrophic pterygium. In T2, these episcleral vessels are a little obscured, and T3 is a thick, fleshy pterygium where we can't really differentiate the underlying vessels, and the fibrovascular tissue is quite thick in these cases. So now we have understood all of this, and all of these, whether depending on T1, T2, and T3, we might take up for surgery. So we need to review the indications when we want to take up a patient for pterygium surgery. So this, all of us would agree that if there is visual loss, either because of the proximity to visual axis or whether the pterygium is threatening visual axis, needs to be excised. Also, if there's a significant amount of induced astigmatism caused because of pterygium. If the patient wants removal and he doesn't like the way pterygium looks, then again that becomes an indication for pterygium surgery. Restriction of motility in case it's a very thick fibrovascular pterygium. Now, whether recurrent inflammation and irritation, if we have recurrent inflammation, whether it's actually an indication for surgery or not is again debatable, and there's no consensus between different ophthalmologists here. But if we have a pterygium which is a little atypical and there is a possibility of neoplasia and we need to rule out OSSN, we definitely need to excise it and send it for histopathological evaluation. Now, the aim of treatment when it comes to pterygium management is that we need to completely remove the pterygium at the Bowman's level, minimize the amount of scarring and induced astigmatism by doing a smooth dissection and trying not to do a dissection at multiple planes, with minimal damage to the underlying sclera. And the most important complication, as all of us know, of pterygium surgery is recurrence. So our aim is to minimize the chances of recurrence after the surgery. Before I go on to talk about the various surgical techniques, I would like to just brush upon the adjunctive therapies which have been used, and most of these have been used with the Bayer sclera technique also. So we have beta irradiation, which is now not practiced anymore because it can lead to scleral necrosis, and which can happen years and years later. It might not happen immediately post-operatively, and also predisposes the patient to the risk of endophthalmitis. Currently, what we use more commonly is 5-fluorouracil and intraoperative and postoperative mitomycin C. Now, to talk about the Bayer sclera excision, this is of course the quickest method, requires the least surgical intervention, but it has a very, very high recurrence rate, up to 80%, and this is not recommended anymore. Even a simple conjunctival closure can be done after Bayer sclera excision, which again has a very high recurrence rate. Now, instead of taking the graft, we can actually take flaps. So from the surrounding conjunctiva, sliding conjunctival flaps can be taken, which has less recurrence rate. But the problems here are that there can be flap retraction and cyst formation post-operatively. So the standard of care, as all of us know now, is the conjunctival autograft. Now this was first described in 1985 by Kenyon et al. And this has the lowest recurrence rate, or it can vary in the different reports, and most of them report between 5 to 15% of recurrence rate. Again, the recurrences would vary depending on the surgical technique employed, and this gives a good cosmetic result. So here, after what I'm doing here is, after I've excised the head of the pterygium, I'm going ahead and doing a thorough subconjunctival tissue dissection. So I'm using my forceps and doing a blunt and combination of blunt and sharp dissection. So going in with closed forceps and then going inside and opening the forceps so that we can take care of the subconjunctival tissue. So this becomes very important to prevent the chances of recurrence, that we take care of the subconjunctival tissue. So once we have done that, we can take a conjunctival autograft, typically taken from the superotemporal quadrant. Here, a lot of people would like to inject something under the conjunctiva, which could either be a saline, or it could be, just lignocaine. But here, I would like to just take a simple graft, just doing a good dissection, making sure that we don't damage the underlying tendons, and take an adequate size graft. Now, this graft can be placed in position either using fibrin glue or using sutures. So here I'm using fibrin glue and placing the graft in position. So this saves on surgical time, and there are few reports to suggest that maybe fibrin glue has like a lesser recurrence rate as compared to the sutures, but it can potentially have graft displacements. Now, conjunctival limbal autograft, because limbal stem cells have been recognized in the etiopathogenesis, but again, we are posing the patient at possibility of stem cell deficiency at the donor site, and it's really not readed because there is no difference when we do a conjunctival autograft or a conjunctival limbal autograft when we look at the recurrence rate. Amniotic membrane transplant again has the advantage that can cover the corneal epithelial defect, but again, the chances of recurrence are way higher with an amniotic membrane transplant than with a conjunctival autograft. Now, the perfect technique of the pterygium extended removal followed by extended conjunctival transplantation was described in 2008. And here, I'm just going to rush through. Basically, it's a very extensive subconjunctival tissue dissection along with the conjunctiva. So a large defect is created, the medial rectus muscle is hooked, and this is the kind of defect that we have, and a superior graft is used to cover this. So it's a large defect, the whole of the conjunctiva along with the semilunar fold is excised. Only 3 millimeters of paracalencular conjunctiva is left. So although it has a low recurrence rate and gives a good cosmesis, but might be an overkill for something which can be treated by a conjunctival autograft, and of course it's a time-consuming surgery. So when we look at the recurrence rate, the least recurrences are with the conjunctival autograft and also with the conjunctival flaps. So here I would like to conclude that primary pterygium, in pathophysiologically speaking, it's an elastotic degeneration due to chronic ultraviolet radiation exposure. What we need to do is a good meticulous removal of the pterygium head of the cornea and the dissection of the subconjunctival tissue. Conjunctival autograft remains the standard of care. Thank you for your attention. And I would now like to invite Dr. Rishi Mohan, who's going to talk in detail about his technique, his preferred technique for the conjunctival autograft. So we're going to have slightly more detailed discussion on the current standard of care.
Thank you, Dr. Ikeda, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me onto this course. So when I see any slide which says pterygium surgery, my technique, it seems like a very egoist thing to write. But I think pretty much the technique that I'm going to show you is a collection of procedures which I will show you in bits and edited, which essentially breaks down the process of a pterygium surgery into what I think gives the best possible results, at least in my hands. So let me go forward. I have no financial interest or disclosures with regards to this presentation. So as Ikeda has already introduced, the gold standard, as described by Kenyon et al. In pterygium surgery, currently now stands as a conjunctival autograft. And I'm largely going to talk about primary pterygia. That's my talk, because there are my other colleagues on the dais who are going to be speaking about complications as well as multiple or recurrent pterygia. So the recurrence rate with the Bayer-Schreier technique, which was originally designed and defined, was very high. And the use of grafts has brought it down substantially. With the conjunctival grafts being slightly better in meta-analysis that have been done. The literature is more in favor of the use of CAG versus AMT. AMT has some advantages. It's easier, it takes less surgical time and looks cosmetically better, at least initially. and is very useful where there isn't a lot of conjunctiva available. So there is a role for AMT, but it's just that the CAGs turn out to be better. A Cochrane review of conjunctival autograft over 20 studies with almost 2,000 eyes showed that at 6 months post-op, patients with conjunctival autografts were significantly less likely to have a recurrence as compared to patients with AMT. And the amniotic membrane by itself did not provide an acceptable recurrence rate. However, of course, there are other aspects to pterygium surgery like cosmesis and quality of life and better vision, etc., which has not been assessed in these studies. So I'll just show you some little snips of the initial part of the surgery where I first mark out where I think is the least amount of conjunctival excision or destruction that I need to do. So if I can salvage conjunctiva in the area of the pterygium, that is my goal, because that reduces the amount of conjunctival tissue that I will need when I am harvesting my graft. So I start with placing marks over the area. Then I start with attacking the head of the pterygium. We showed a very nice, you saw a very nice little video clip earlier, which showed the stripping or the dehiscence of the pterygium being done. So this is a technique where I first use the crescent to dissect the head of the pterygium off, and then I will undermine the conjunctiva, try and separate the fleshy body of the pterygium from the subconjunctival area or the tissues. Also simultaneously separate the body of the pterygium from the episclera and the sclera underneath, and then try and create as much of dissection and space as possible, leaving as much of conjunctival intact. I do go out into the periphery on all sides to try and dissect, as Ikeda very elegantly showed, try and remove the pterygium tissue from there as well. The initial dissection with the crescent, one has to be careful not to go too deep into the cornea, and so keep the crescent blade flat. Once you have initiated your discussion, keep it flat. Now if you look at the top left corner, that is one of the key elements to creating a smooth corneal surface, which is the use of a blur. Hemostasis is important, however, it's not to be overdone, because you don't mind a little bit of ooze, but not too much, because the presence of serum does help in making a better pterygium hold. So these are just clippings. As you can see, what Ikeda referred to earlier was the use of a balloon of anesthetic, which has a little bit of adrenaline in it to reduce the amount of bleeding that one may incur, and to try and create this area of dissection. And as you can see now, on the upper right-hand corner, I am trying to remove the body of the pterygium after dissecting it both from the subconjunctival space as well as from what would now appear to be bare sclera in that entire area. So this is the area of the removal or the excision of the pterygium itself. The next step is to harvest the autograft. So now once we have the area nicely cleared from the pterygium body, as well as having the bare sclera and hemostasis has been achieved, we mark or measure the area of conjunctiva that we need, and similar marks that we had placed on the pterygium head and the body, we create that largely in the upper temporal quadrant, and create the marks there, and then start the harvesting process. So just a couple of videos to show how the harvesting is done. The marks are being placed, and then we use a little bit of anesthetic to try and balloon up the conjunctiva. And we don't have to puncture the conjunctiva. We can use a flat back end of a forceps to make the anesthetic spread around. And then we can attack the conjunctiva in that fashion, try and remain as superficial as possible, create as thin a graft as possible. And at the limbal edge, one tries to go as corneal as possible to get that rim of limbal cells, which are the privilege of the conjunctiva and the corneal epithelium in that area. And once we harvest that, we spread it out like this. And if the conjunctiva doesn't crumple up too much, you know you've got a very thin conjunctiva. If it crumples up too much, it means there's a lot of subconjunctival tissue which is attached to it. The last step involves the fixation. And here, my preferred technique is to use the fibrin glue. And again, as you know, there's component 1 and there's component 2. Component 1 is placed in this fashion just on the edge and inside that little area. Component 2 is placed on the exposed, overturned graft. And then the graft is just folded over. And as you can see here, the cuts that I made on the conjunctival graft are always outside the marked area. Now what that does is it helps me A, define which was the limbal side, B, it tells me that there is no upside down attachment that I'm likely to put. The next thing that I'm showing here now is how we crimp it, which means you try and bring and oppose the edges of the cut conjunctiva and the edge of the conjunctival autograft. Oops, what happened here? Right, so we are trying to do that, and a similar process being done in the video at the bottom, where we have put component 1 of the tissue glue and component 2 of the tissue glue, and then we're going to upturn it. It doesn't always upturn very nicely, so it can slide a little bit, and then one has to spread it out and ensure that the limbal edge gets attached at the limbus. And at this point of time, the patient is largely looking temporally, if this is a nasal pterygium. But once you start to do this process, ask the patient to look straight, because if he's continuing to look temporally, you will never be able to pull enough conjunctiva to create the apposition. And that's important, because you can then mobilize the conjunctiva and ensure that you get good crimping in that area, and that helps to create a relatively flatter and a better opposed edge as compared to if you just left it bare in that region, and you'd have less of wound gape in the post-operative period. So the salient features, just to revise and go back onto the 3 videos that I showed, is that conjunctival autograft is preferred over amniotic. I always use a surface polishing with a burr, because it leaves me with a much better looking cornea and with less tendency to recurrence, because roughness of the cornea is one of the features and one of the factors that may lead to recurrence. Oversize the conjunctival graft and ensure that it is thin. Crimping, which is that process of trying to coapt the 2 edges of the conjunctiva. I don't use antimetabolites at all in my primary pterygia, and I do prefer tissue glue over sutures, if for no other reason than not only to reduce the time, but also from a comfort angle. In the post-operative management, it's pretty standard. I don't use a bandage contact lens. I use a local steroid and antibiotic combination along with lubricants for about 3 weeks and taper it. And then I tend to continue with a low-strength diluted steroid for between the week 3 and week 12. Lubricating eye drops as far as possible, again, preservative-free. And the presence of cyclosporin, especially if I suspect that there is an element of dry eye preoperatively, which we have already pre-assessed. So this is my standard post-operative management for my primary pterygia. Thank you so much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Rishi,
Thanks.
for a very nice videos. Any question, comments from the audience would like to?
You are doing in a topical, na, sir?
Topical, yes.
Yeah. And after surgery, bandage?
I'm sorry?
Bandage or patch?
Yes, I do patch them for about 6 to 8 hours.
6 to 8 hours.
Yes.
Any other question or comments?
I'm sorry? The specification of the burr that you are using. Right. The burr is what used to be called the Alger brush. It was originally designed to be a burr for removing foreign bodies as well as for the corneal rustering. So if you can go to the trade and ask for a rustering remover, but what you have to look at is the tip, because this comes in a 0.5 millimeter dia, a 1 millimeter dia, and a 3 millimeter dia. The one that I'm using is a 3 millimeter dia because you need it to be like a globe, rotating very rapidly, which is what creates that smooth polish. There's another company that makes it, but it's very expensive. It's almost $800 or $900. Much better motor, but if you can afford that price, great. The one that I'm using, the tip costs about $100, and the handle I think is about $70 or $80. So it's not that expensive.
It is once again, sir. It's also available with Epsilon here.
Yeah.
No financial interest. It costs around 8,000, 9,000 rupees.
So the Epsilon one
about
works
$150.
really well. So I use the Epsilon one, and that also works really well. The motor is pretty good and cost about 7,000 to 8,000 bucks.
It's probably the same one.
Yes,
The,
yes.
It's
must-
called an alga brush.
Yes,
Algar
The
brush.
original
brush.
term, yes.
We use in experimental studies for rabbit cornea and other
Right.
things.
Correct.
Algebras.
Correct.
Sir.
Yes, doctor.
Sir, actually, so much bulbar conjunctiva removal is not necessary. Simple limbal conjunctiva, which width of 3 to 4 millimeters enough.
Yes, I do try and measure it, and when I'm actually trying to dissect, I will try and see as minimum of conjunctiva that I excise. So that's part and parcel of the initial curve. Otherwise, initially you will tend to remove much larger bits, but as time goes on, one can help to save as much of the conjunctiva in the nasal area, and so that will reduce the size of the conjunctival autograft. But it's all linked, so one has to measure it, and case to case it has to be monitored and changed.
So it is actually circumficial barrage type of transplantation, limbal conjunctival transplantation, which will just don't allow to recur the pterygium.
Yes, there are two aspects to putting the CAG. One is the barrier effect, and the other is that you're transporting some limbal cells which are healthier, since there is that postulate of it being a limbal cell deficiency. You're trying to put back some limbal cells in the area of the defect so that the cornea epithelializes very rapidly. So that's the two aims, unless there's something different that will come from the dais.
That's right. So there are two types of stem cells. One is limbal stem cells, one is conjunctival stem cells. So what we are also transplanting are conjunctival stem cells in the conjunctiva.
Yes, doctor.
Please.
Sir, some
Yes.
people use conjunctiva of the pterygium itself.
Use conjunctiva?
Of the pterygium itself. Some people
Um,
are using conjunctiva of the pterygium itself because it is not the conjunctiva which is at fault in the pterygium, it is the subconjunctival tissue.
I think
What is wrong in that? Some people are using.
The problem, I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, would be that the fibrotic tissue that is under the head of the pterygium, that is definitely not healthy. So the rest of the conjunctiva you save, but you leave a bare sclera and it will retract. Even if you remove 2 millimeters or 2.5 millimeters of that conjunctiva, which you cannot dissect away from the body of the pterygium, that conjunctiva is going to retract. And that's where you leave your bare sclera. And that's where the recurrences will come in. So a barrier effect has to be created, and you have to do it in the form of some graft, and usually CAG works best.
So the same conch, there may be a downside is, I'm talking here, sir, here. So the fibroblast in the subconjunctival tissue of pterygium, you may have some abnormality there. So if you are bringing a healthy conjunctival autograft from the other side, that might be better.
And also, it might be really adherent because there's so much fibroblastic proliferation. It might be really, really difficult to actually just get the conjunctiva out of the pterygium and actually be able to dissect just the conjunctiva and leave all the fibroblastic tissue that is there adherent to the underlying the pterygium.
More questions, or can we go to next talk?
At times I have seen a pedunculated growth when bare this pterygium, this excision is done.
Yes,
So-
that is like a granulation tissue.
Right.
Granulation tissue, which because of the, if you did not cover it properly, what Rishi was talking about, sizing it, making sure that the S2S position, in those situations, you may get a granuloma. That's called pyogenic granuloma.
Okay, thank you, sir.
We often see that actually not in the pterygium site, but in the site where the excision of the
site.
graft has been taken. So that's where you can get a pyogenic granuloma, and that's where that role of steroids, which I put on my last slide, is important from a longer term perspective. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thanks.
thank you, Rishi.
There are no other questions? Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rishi. And now we'll move on to the next talk. So lots of times we encounter pterygium and cataract both together. And a lot of times we wonder whether we should take it up as a sequential surgery or can we actually combine both the surgeries. So that is what Dr. Rajat Jain is going to discuss with us today, whether we should do a one-step or a two-stage procedure. Dr. Rajat, please.
Thank you, Ekeda, and thanks for allowing me to be a part of this course. So my talk has essentially been summarized by Dr. Ekeda. I'll be discussing whether we should go about doing a cataract plus a pterygium surgery combined or a step. So we'll be discussing various grades of pterygium as are shown in this picture. The questions we'll answer in this presentation are: when should we perform a simultaneous or a sequential surgery? If we are supposed to perform a one-step surgery, excuse me, is it safe to perform a one-step surgery? What are the inter-op considerations? And how do we go about calculating the IOL power? And if we are supposed to do a simultaneous surgery, how much to wait between the two surgeries? And then we'll discuss some clinical case scenarios and we'll try to formulate some guidelines. Okay, So how to decide whether it is a one-step or two-step surgery? The most important fact here is that you have to look into the size or the girth of the pterygium per se. We'll discuss this in detail. So just remember this: size, that is in clock hours, and going into the cornea, and girth, that is the thickness, or whether it's a fleshy or atrophic pterygium. These two are the most important factors which have to be taken into consideration before we decide. Now, this is there are 3 photographs in 3 slides taken from a below article. I'm sorry. So this is a type 1, wherein there is a small pterygium. It is riding from periphery. If you see this central topography here, this is having a regular kind of an astigmatism on topography. That means pterygium tissue, see, this is the area of the pterygium which is obscured by in the topography. This area is that of the pterygium. See, it's coming from this side. So it is coming onto the cornea, it is affecting the topography, but it is still not affecting the central 3 to 4 millimeters of the optical zone. So you can still go ahead with a one-step surgery. This is to crudely say that. Another photograph of the same article. See the amount of pterygium it has. It's a highly fleshy pterygium, multiple vessels, appears to be thick. See the effect it's showing on the topography. It's affecting the topography till here. It's almost encroaching the central 3 to 4 millimeters. And if you see the astigmatism, it's highly irregular. So herein we would be inclined to do a two-step surgery rather than a one-step surgery. We'll discuss in detail further. Again, atrophic kind of a pterygium. By the TANS classification, you would feel it's an atrophic pterygium. But see the how much amount of astigmatism it is causing in the center. So you would definitely be inclined to do a two-step surgery in this. So this is in a nutshell, but we'll discuss this in detail. So one study which has been published, which it tells us that if the size of the pterygium is 2 millimeters or more into the cornea, you are more inclined to go towards a two-step surgery because it is more likely to cause a residual astigmatism. So the advantage of one-step surgery, obviously it's a single-step surgery, so it's economic, it's good for the patient, good for the doctor, and it's more relevant in the Indian setting because we have a lot of patients coming to us with cataract and pterygiums. The next question was whether it is safe to combine an intraocular and an extraocular procedure. So multiple studies have shown that it is safe to do an intraocular and an extraocular procedure combined. Study published in Journal of Postgrad Medicine showed it's safe. Another study showed that there was no evidence of any infections if we do a trab or a cataract along with the pterygium. This was published in BJO. Another study recently showed that a combined procedure did not result in any complications. So doing a combined surgery, whether it is when it is allowed, is safe. That is what we have proven now. Next is, suppose we are doing a combined surgery, how do you predict the IOL power? Because whenever you remove the pterygium, obviously the K1, K2 will change, the IOL power will change. So this study showed us that at 3 months, if the pterygium was small enough, 48% of the eyes were within plus or minus 0.5 diopters of effect, emmetropia or whatever the result, refraction was aimed for, and around 82% were within 1 diopter. It's intuitive. Larger the pterygium pre-op, larger the change in K, and larger the instability of the error. The larger amount of pterygium which was the pre-op, if you do it a simultaneous surgery, obviously the errors would tend to be higher. So it's very intuitive, but that is what was shown by this article. Another article told us that if you make a calculation by a DC by A formula, whereas D is the arc length, the extent into the cornea, B is the arc length, A is the this distance, then you can try to find out that how much you will be able to achieve near your aimed refraction. And what they told was that only the extension of the pterygium was important. The width and the area ratio was not important. Extension into the cornea, I mean. Japanese have found out, they have put some multiple complications and multiple permutations and combinations. They have found out a formula that if you put this kind of formula, you would be able to achieve within plus or minus 0.5 diopters. I don't use it, but it was there in the literature, so I am projecting it. Appears to be very complex. So another study which we had, and this study was large, showed us that if the size of the pterygia is more than 2.4, that is जैसा मैंने पहले बोला 2 centimeters or 2 millimeters or more, then the implanted IOL should be at least 0.5 diopters less than what you are aiming for. Again, intuitively it means the same, because the K1, K2 will change, that's why your power has to reduce down. So, finishing off with one step, the IOL considerations are, you should avoid toric IOLs or any astigmatic corrections in this procedure, because you don't know how much K reading will change on itself. So try to put in monofocal IOLs and always prepare the patient that you might end up having some kind of a residual astigmatism. So surgical concentrations are, because you're combining an intraocular and an extraocular procedure, ensure that the tunnel is watertight. There is low threshold for suturing because you want to ensure that it's tight. There should be a low threshold for suturing. Side ports should be carefully placed. So now pterygiums are either medial or temporal. I'm a temporal surgeon, so if I'm sitting temporal and I make side, and the pterygium is nasal, or if somebody is sitting superior and the pterygium is nasal, then side ports could give you a problem. So side ports position should be carefully placed. Bandage continence may be considered because it helps in faster healing. Lubrication has to be more than adequate than what is required for a cataract surgery. Low frequency of steroids, at least in the initial part, till the pterygium surface heals, the corneal surface heals. So next is, when do we do a two-step surgery? So as has been told by me in the previous slides, the general rule of consensus is 2 millimeters or more pterygia in the cornea, try to go for a two-step surgery. But there are caveats, and we'll show this in the clinical examples. So one study showed that if there was, the next question is how much to wait. Suppose you have done a pterygium surgery now, how much should you wait before doing a cataract surgery? So there are multiple studies showing that. One study says it should be 1 month. Another study says it is as good as 1 week. Another study says, so there are variations, okay? So normally I would tend to wait for about 2 to 4 weeks for the epithelialization to take place, ocular surface to stabilize, conjunctiva to become normal. So all these things would lead for me to, wait around 2 to 4 weeks. But that can be customized if the patient is outstationed. So obviously you plan the pterygium surgery first and wait for about 2 to 4 weeks. Lubrication is very, very important. So this was a study published recently, and it showed us that in sequential surgery patients, the K reading tends to stabilize at 1 month, and it stayed so. Post cataract surgery there was no change. This is pre-op, astigmatism around 7. This is post-op immediate, that is 1.88. This post-op 1 month around 1.49. So there's only a change of around 0.3 to 0.4 at a month, which is not very important. So probably you can take up surgery relatively early. This is the same thing. So what they showed was, after sequential pterygium cataract surgery, the astigmatism could be controlled. Obviously it is intuitive. You don't need to remember that. So the most important factor is size and girth, and you have to measure the astigmatism based upon, if you have it, topography. So we'll take some 5 examples, and that will make the picture clear. So we have a case here of a cataract with a pterygium. Pterygium is starting here, and this is the area of the pterygium. So what should be the plan? We have a show of hands here. 1 step, 2 step?
Yeah.
1 step. How many for 2 step? Okay.
Can I have a different option?
Yes, sir. Please.
I will ask the patient whether he is really bothered by this. If he's not bothered and he's cosmetically not concerned, so it's your problem that you are trying to address. If the patient says, this, I'm not bothered, I'll just do a cataract surgery.
Absolutely correct.
And also we need to look at the astigmatism. So can we
Correct.
have the topography or tell us the amount of astigmatism
Yes,
that this patient
we'll be coming
has?
in that. So the size measured was 2.8. I am telling the size because we have earlier read that 2.4 or more we should be going for a 2-step surgery. That's what I'm just telling you. I'll show you the topography now. So astigmatism was around 3.5 diopters, and there was an indentation. Now I don't know if you can see this. See, there's a line here, as if something is pressing onto the cornea. This indentation is very classical. So this indentation tells you that it is causing some kind of astigmatism on the cornea. See, this is the topography picture. See how much of pressure this cornea is causing. If you make a white line, see this. Okay, and the astigmatism is, around 5.6 diopters. See this, 5.6 diopters. So the topographic astigmatism is 5.6 diopters, the acceptance is 3.5 diopters. So now what you should be doing? 1 step or 2 step? 2 step. So this is if you can just do a simple K1, K2, you will come to know. We'll discuss this again in the examples ahead. So the plan would be to do a 2-step surgery. Okay. Next example, very small pterygium. See that? It's nothing. What would you do? 1 step, 2 step? So millimeters would be around, probably not less than 2 here. Yeah, I'll come to the astigmatism. Before that, 1 step, 2 step. See the astigmatism, 7.28. So that's what I was trying to tell you. The study says 2 millimeter or more, but even smaller pterygiums can cause high astigmatism. So K1, K2 is essential. Size is not very important actually. So this small kind of fleshy pterygium, because it was a thick pterygium, it was pressing on the cornea and causing a high astigmatism. So it was causing a 7.2 diopter of astigmatism. See the picture there, top right. This is the indentation caused by the pterygium here. So it is causing a high astigmatism. Now 1 step, 2 step, fast. Yeah. So this is the same picture showing a 7 diopter of astigmatism.
So this patient Rajat, came for pterygium surgery.
This
cataract
patient
surgery?
this patient came for cataract surgery. So I was planning a cataract surgery. I did a K1, K2. I found it was. I also didn't realize it would be a 7 diopter astigmatism.
The superior limbus looks a little abnormal to me. Did he have?
That was just degeneration.
Yeah. Just the pterygium.
So that could be artifactual, no? Because it is compressive, probably. So this other, see this patient, again came for a cataract surgery. Both eyes pterygium, vision is there, K1, K2 is there, 4 diopter of astigmatism on the right side and about 8 diopter of astigmatism on the left side. This was also a scarring. This patient has already had a pterygium surgery, has a lot of scarring on the cornea and also has some kind of recurrence. Okay, I'm just finishing. 2 more cases. Again, very small pterygium. This is the last patient, last case of mine. Again a small pterygium, but with a good astigmatism, only of about 0.4 or 0.5. So in this case would be ideal to go for a 1 step. So in a nutshell, what I'm trying to explain here is, pterygium girth and size is definitely important, but please do K1, K2. K1, K2 is as simple a test which you can do in your clinic, which will guide you whether you should be doing a graded surgery or a simultaneous surgery. Otherwise, patient would not be happy. If you do a graded simultaneous surgery, then the IOL power calculation will go haywire, and then it will be a problem for you. So my take-home point should be, obviously the size and girth is important. Do a keratometry and a topography. Simultaneous 1 step would be when the cylinder is less than 2 diopters. A central case should be a symmetric or a regular, that is if you have a topography, and it is safe to do a simultaneous surgery. And if you're supposed to do a sequential surgery, cylinder should be ideally should be more than 2. If it is showing any case of irregular astigmatism, 2-stage surgery is definitely warranted, and 2 to 4 weeks of interval is ideal between 2 surgeries. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rajat, for extensively reviewing the literature and keeping us interested with your wonderful examples. So, does anybody in the audience would like to ask any questions?
Yes, please.
Please come near mic, those who you want to ask questions.
Two-step surgery, only reason is the after surgery the refractive outcome only, na?
Correct. Yes.
Yes.
Or any other thing.
सर IOL पावर कैलकुलेशन जब हम करते हैं ना 1 स्टेप में, तो उसमें अगर एस्टिग्मेटिज्म बहुत ज़्यादा है तो हमारा IOL पावर कैलकुलेशन अच्छा नहीं होगा.
But sometimes it happen the mature hypermature cataract is there and pterygium more than 3-4
For
millimeter.
that, I suggest a slightly different approach. The patient who have patient those who have hypermature cataract, pterygium, that means the pterygium has been there for 20-30 years. Cataract has come later, and they are not very keen on surgery. So whatever surgery you do, one surgery if you do, think of doing the surgery which will enhance the vision, rather than trying to address the astigmatism part. So therefore, in those patients, I'll do the cataract surgery first, and say if you are not happy or if the vision is not suboptimal, then think of correcting that later.
So then
That's a very personalized approach.
सर वैसे भी जो पेशेंट आपके पास टोटल हेमोपेचो कैटरेक्ट के साथ आया है, उसको वैसे भी आधा नंबर 1 नंबर से फर्क पड़ने वाला नहीं है. उसमें तो कैटरेक्ट करना बेटर ही है.
I want to add that thing.
उसमें तो कैटरेक्ट ही करना है. We are talking about refractive results. So if you want to have a good refractive result, do a 2-step surgery. But obviously if you are sitting in a periphery, गांव की अम्मा वगैरह आती हैं उनको, तो फिर तो हमें कैटरेक्ट करना
I'm
है.
working in a periphery.
Yes, definitely cataract surgery should be done. Should be
More
done.
than 80% cases I am doing.
Yeah,
combined
definitely you
surgery.
should do a cataract surgery.
They
In
people
those
don't mind to
patient-
about
in those
refractive.
patients, please do cataract.
Yes.
Because if you do pterygium,
वो
they
दोबारा-
will start believing these surgeries don't help.
Yes.
The doctors do
I-
surgery only for
I-
themselves.
Yes.
So make sure that you address what the patient wants.
वो दूसरी सर्जरी के लिए आएंगे भी नहीं आपके
Eyesight.
पास.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
Correct. Sir.
Some of the cases, whatever you showed, the level of astigmatism may not be just pterygium induced.
Correct.
As all of us know.
So we have compared
it
the
might just be a T1 or T2 level of pterygium, where it is not just a pterygium induced also.
Yeah.
Of course, doing 2-step surgeries is fine to be on a safer side, But post pterygium surgery, you'll know the exact level of astigmatism left out.
Yes.
So how much is pterygium induced is always a question. So depending on that, always you can decide. Probably you can do a trial and find out what was exactly pterygium induced. So that way, 1 step or 2 step depends on the level of astigmatism also fine. But how much is pterygium induced is a question, because it might be a pre-existing corneal astigmatism or any other reason related also. Many a times central optic zone may not be involved also with all the pressures and astigmatism and other things. So even after refractive surgeries also, we do have a lot of corneal astigmatism, but patient will be having 6/6 vision sometimes,
Yes.
you know, post LASIK and other things. Similarly here also we might have 6/6 vision without any additional spectacle aids and other things. So it's always a question whether we were really sure enough to do such procedures regularly or not.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, I think it's very valid points that what you made, and it has to be looked into the context of that particular patient. And in your view, what you are seeing astigmatism, is it likely to be caused by pterygium?
Yeah.
It's very important to segregate these two, induced by pterygium versus innate astigmatism in that cornea.
So that can be known only once we operate the pterygium and then find the post-op case.
So preoperatively, I think it's also important to tell the patients, because there is obviously a residual corneal scarring. If the pterygium has been there for years and years, you might address the pterygium, but the scarring itself can lead to an astigmatism.
Yeah.
So that again becomes really, really important in these cases. Yes,
I
sir.
think the question of addressing the pterygium and this as a 1 stage or 2 stage would also derive from the fact whether this is a progressive pterygium or not. If it's a pterygium that's been sitting there for 10 years, creating a diopter and a half of astigmatism, but is completely stable, quiet, atrophic, I wouldn't touch it at all.
Yeah.
I would just leave it, because I'd expect that pterygium to remain stable the way it is and deal with the astigmatism in the cataract surgery, rather than to do the question of doing the pterygium doesn't come up at all. So I think that's also one
Yeah.
aspect that has to be looked at
So-
when one is assessing these
Yeah,
patients.
the same thing which I said earlier, the patient who are waiting and not getting pterygium surgery for 20, 30 years, that means they are not really cosmetically bothered by that. And also their vision probably whatever before cataract, they were happy. So therefore, it's very important to take feedback from the patient. What is that they are looking for? And then how accurate their IOL power calculation. And demanding patient, yes, you may do all these things what he was telling. Otherwise, if you are rural setting, your requirement might be totally different.
So again, if this patient, to my mind, if the patient was, suppose, again depends on, like sir rightly said, on how the patient, what the patient expects post-operatively. If he came and told me that I really don't want to wear glasses post-operatively and he had 1.5 diopter of an astigmatism, then I would still think of doing a 2-step surgery if I'm thinking of implanting a toric IOL. That, to my mind, if the pterygium has been there for 10 years, would be the only indication if the patient is very, very particular that after cataract surgery is very demanding and he really doesn't want to wear glasses, then I would tell him, yes, let's do pterygium surgery first. Let's see how much of astigmatism we can get rid of, whether we can bring it down to less than 1 diopter by a simple pterygium surgery, and whether you really need a toric IOL or not. To me, that would be the only indication. Otherwise, I would rightly said, go ahead with just a simple cataract surgery. And also, I would like to make a comment about the superior and the temporal where you're sitting. So what I typically do is when I combine cataract and pterygium in one sitting, I go according to my comfort zone. I shift position. So I do my cataract temporally, and then I shift and do a pterygium superiorly. So that again becomes an option, and so that we are comfortable, whatever we've been doing, we don't disturb that and try not to do one surgery from the other side. Makes life a little bit easier.
The benefit of that is that your side port is away from the pterygium site. So if you're sitting temporal, your side port is 10 and 2, and then you do it in nasal pterygium, that's totally away from so there's no communication of outside and inside.
That also helps.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
No, you should have a stability of K1, K2, obviously.
So, very simply to conclude, I would say that if you don't have topography, don't have anything, just do a simple acceptance, check how much cylinder the patient is actually accepting, do a simple keratometry, do a refraction and a keratometry, and then decide whether it's really thick and fleshy, keeping the patient's expectations in mind and whether really patient wants pterygium removal or not, and what is his requirement post-op after cataract surgery. Is he a very demanding patient? Does he require freedom from glasses? That would be the top points to decide whether we need to do a 1-step or a 2-step procedure. Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
I have a question for Dr. Rishi Mohan. At times, we see that after the graft, we have done the surgery. So there's a sanguineous collection of fluid below the graft. Are there any tips or tricks to prevent that, and does it ultimately affect the outcome I mean, any comment on that?
Yeah, that's a good question, and we do see that. We see that largely if the grafts are large. We see it in grafts which have a lot of subconjunctival tissue, that means thick grafts. You also see retraction as well as it crumples up and gets raised because of the serosanguinized fluid. It can happen if there was not enough, hemostasis that had been produced. So one way is to just puncture it, or on table, many people create multiple perforations in the graft to allow a serosanguinous ooze to come out. I personally don't find it to be very useful. I do leave a few nicks in this graft when I'm using a large graft. So if I have something which is like 8 millimeters by 9 millimeters or 10 millimeters, in that kind of a conjunctival autograft, I will make a couple of central perforations so that I don't impact the edge to maybe allow whatever fluid accumulates to come up. Otherwise, the other thing that you will see happening is if you are not using adequate steroid, then again you're going to get more of this kind of occurrence. So those are just the tips that I can share. I'm not sure if there's anything more. So yeah, pretty much.
I think it's primarily the function of how much is the bleeding under the graft and how tightly you make it adherent. Sometimes you see the same situation under the amniotic membrane. So what you could do is, if you are anticipating, you can make some holes on the graft, but it's likely to close very quickly. In amniotic membrane, it won't close, but in the conjunctival autograft, it's going to close very quickly.
All right, so we will move on to the next talk. I'm very, very privileged to have with me Dr. Sangwan here, who's been a mentor and guide, not just in ophthalmology, but also in life. And today he'll be talking to us about the complications of pterygium surgery and how to manage them. Can we have Dr. Sangwan, please?
Thank you very much, and please participate in the discussions, and let's make it interactive. This patient I saw when I joined LVP in 1998. He had a recurrent pterygium with sembleflon. He had undergone pterygium surgery 8 times in that eye. 8 times. So he had undergone multiple surgeries, and what the problem I felt was that the gap between one surgery and the other surgery was very short, sometimes within 4 months or 6 months. And his vision was 20/80 with restricted motility. He's in Indian Railways as a train driver, and he says, I'm going to lose my job, and what you can do about it. So this is how the pterygium looked like. And at that time, I did a surgery by metically dissecting, hooking the medial rectus, cleaned up, and then combined conjunctival limbal autograft, pterygium, AMG, mitomycin C. At the end of the surgery, he said, Doctor, the amount of time you have spent on this surgery is more than combined 8 previous surgeries. So then I said, is it a compliment or am I a bad surgeon? He said, I don't know that, but this is my observation. So what it turned out to be, after about 6 months, the corneal scarring which was in the pupillary area, we did a PTK, and he had no recurrence for next 2-3 year follow-up, which I saw him. And after about 10-12 years later, he came in my OPD again with 2 young kids, just finished college. And he says, Dr. Saab, that operation ensured that they go to college, and today both of them have got a job. As I did not realize the importance of this surgery. So sometimes when we are doing surgeries, we do not realize it's not just surgery, it is affecting so many things in people's life, so many things are connected. This is another surgery of recurrent pterygium with the conjunctival limbal autograft with mitomycin C. And this is also one of the very old, 2002. Now my technique is slightly different. I try to work from the other way around. I do not touch the head first. I dissect the body and the peripheral part, and then cut all the adhesions at the limbus, and then try to do something called pterygiorhexis, meaning you try to peel, and then you'll find a very smooth plane, mostly in primary pterygium. In second leg here, you are able to find that. So when you peel it off, you will get a plane which will be quite smooth, and you may not have to use any other instruments. If it is a primary pterygium, you will universally get a plane of insertion of the pterygium into the cornea, and that plane will be very, very smooth. So you remove this. After that, use mitomycin C, and then the conjunctival limbal autograft as shown earlier by Rishi. I'm not very meticulous about measuring and all that, but those of you who are so meticulous, I think it's a very good idea to measure the defect and precisely size that. This is mitomycin C. What? No, only for the recurrent pterygium. And no, if it's a 2-time recurrence in my hand and a recurrence in 1 time by somebody else. So this is the amniotic membrane graft. At that time, I was not using the fibrin glue. I was using 10-O monofilament, and now almost always I use fibrin glue Tissile for all conjunctival or amniotic surgery. So you can use suture, you can use fibrin glue, whichever things you like. So the difference in my surgery now is I use the conjunctival limbal autograft first on the bare sclera, and then put the amniotic membrane graft covering the donor side, the recipient side, and the bare corneal side. In addition, I put few explants of the limbus on the corneal side. So that is a combination of mini slat with conjunctival autograft. Huh? Okay. What I said was, now what I do, after removing the pterygium and harvesting the conjunctival autograft, I put the amniotic membrane graft with fibrin glue covering entire area of donor side, the corneal side, and the recipient area from where pterygium is excised. Stick that, then on top of that stick your conjunctival autograft, and with the fibrin glue also I will use sutures to anchor that. And then on top of that I'll put few corneal limbal explants on the corneal side. 2 to 3 limbal explants. That's called mini slat. And there is a study from Toronto by Alan Slomovich of doing mini slat being very successful for recurrent pterygium. They published last year. So there are some of these early complications which are very trivial, like just now there was a discussion about hematoma under the graft. Usually it resolves unless it's very big and it may lift the graft. Otherwise, you don't really have to intervene. There may be some localized epithelial defect or granuloma formation, but those generally respond well with the topical treatment. Late complications mostly is the recurrence, and there are some serious complications which are very rare now, and other are pyogenic granuloma, and these are mostly related to the improper harvesting or improper sizing. The recurrence is a real issue. Whatever the technique we do, still the recurrence does happen. Even with the conjunctival autograft, there was a study that we did in LVP of 1500 pterygium surgery. We found that rate of recurrence was least with conjunctival autograft, about 5 to 7%. But it was done by different surgeons at different time. So that represents a real life situation. This is a patient who was referred following a pterygium surgery with mitomycin C. And also this complication happens more if you do not use the conjunctival autograft, if you leave the bare sclera and use these, and also cautery. Cautery we do use, but we don't leave the sclera bare at all. So this patient, what we did, he has to be given systemic treatment with cyclophosphamide, systemic steroid for 6 weeks, and then we undertook the surgery by hooking the medial rectus. Why? Because if you do not, then you don't know whether this scleral necrosis is beyond the muscle. Sometimes it may be, so you need to detach and then reattach over the graft. So this is the patient over next 2-year follow-up. Then you may also have a different kind of a problem like this. This is not a CINS or this is not an inflammatory problem. This is a localized healing problem where the sclera is little necrotic and conjunctival epithelium or conjunctiva is not able to grow. There is a third problem like this, it can be infective. It can be infective scleritis. So that needs systemic immunosuppression. This particular condition, this one would need simply debridement, advancement of the conjunctival graft, or using independent autograft or amniotic membrane, or both. And if it is infection, you suspect infection, you should do scraping and then treat accordingly. This patient finally underwent a cataract surgery after 2 years of the patch graft. When he came, at that time, this was not even thought of that it will reach that level, but he finally recovered excellent vision with this surgery and long-term immunosuppressive treatment. So the using adjuvants, whether mitomycin C or other adjuvants, you should be extremely cautious. What these complications are of different era, but nowadays we don't see these many complications. But if you use the mitomycin C, always cover that area with a conjunctival autograft. That will significantly reduce the chance of any sins, or sins can still happen, but the healing problems will not be there at all. Some of the indications when you have recurrent pterygium, so you may have cystic swelling, cystic degeneration. You may have this is a post-pterygium surgery. So these are 4 or 5 indications where you may have to do the surgery in recurrent pterygium, other than cosmetic patient's requirement in terms of the cosmosis. But always wait for some time, at least 4 to 6 months. Do not rush the surgery just because it failed or recurred and you get scared and say, oh no, I need to do surgery all over again. Why should you wait? Because you allow the fibroblast, you allow the mature scar to form, so that it's not, it's just like somebody is angry, you poke him again, he becomes more angry. So the same thing will happen with the fibroblast here. So if they are already creating an abnormal collagen and you do surgery again, you inflict more trauma. So these are just showing you how you dissect, and then primarily you're going to use the same kind of technique, using either combination conjunctival autograft with or without amniotic membrane. What is the recurrence? Recurrence, to me, it looks like it is not really the UV radiation, or it's not an elastotic degeneration. It's more of fibrosis. And fibrosis is directly related to our what you call the surgery-induced trauma. And it depends on how do you dissect, because the histology of recurrent and primary pterygium is very different. So how do we prevent fibrosis? There are multiple things that are in the literature which we talked about. But to me, these 3 things listed down, adequate excision with conjunctival coverage has the best outcomes, including limbus. When you say conjunctival limbal autograft may not have a significant advantage that I showed earlier in a publication, but now with the slet, I think this might have a beneficial advantage. Why? Because the slet also has, the slet pieces also have the mesenchymal stem cells, and that reduces the scarring over a period of time. These are what we are seeing in patients with slet, and if the defect is covered, an adjunctive treatment is generally not required. So therefore, these thiotypa, 5-FU, irradiation, all those things are gone. So effective, good surgery and effective steroid use post-operative. We have not in context of the pterygium surgery, but in our slet study we showed that if your Tenon's capsule is intact and your graft is such, you have harvested only the conjunctiva, and while dissecting also you do not damage the Tenons at the pterygium site, the chances of fibrosis is very less, and the chance of recurrence reduces significantly, because the healing is much better. If you leave bare sclera, these things which we were talking earlier about pyogenic granuloma, likely formation is much higher. So what are the tips and tricks to avoid recurrence? Avoid iatrogenic trauma, complete but gentle dissection of Tenons, and you can identify normal versus abnormal Tenons capsule by staining with trypan blue. Trypan blue stains abnormal Tennant's capsule. So you should excise only that part, and you should not try to be aggressive like in perfect technique. You should not try to go after the Tennant's capsule. Measure the bare area and try to cover as much as nicely as possible, and ensure the complete closure of the conjunctiva autograft either with fibrin glue, the sutures, or both. And the donor area, if you have the availability of amniotic membrane, that will help in reducing the inflammation and fibrosis, and patient will be much more comfortable. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, sir, for such extensive coverage of all the complications of pterygium. Can we have a few quick questions? And I would like to invite Dr. Namrata Sharma to talk to us in the meantime about double-headed and recurrent pterygium. Thank you, ma'am, for taking out time for us.
Thank
this
you.
busy schedule.
Thank you, Keda, for...
Are there any questions before Namrata starts? Any question related to the recurrence? Or can we go ahead with the next talk? All right, Namrata, all
Thank
yours.
you. Thank you, sir. And I'm sure after that wonderful talk, there would be no questions. And basically, I also would be talking about my experience on recurrent and double-headed pterygium. And it's always a pleasure to be a part of Ikeda's course, and she's been doing it for a few years, and each one of them is very successful. I would be talking to you about recurrent and double-headed pterygia, and this would be, when a pterygium excision is done with the autoconj or conjunctival autograft, how it will look like, and this is post-op day 3 and then post-op day 8. Now, sometimes you can have a picture like this when you have a small Dellen. So for these cases, you may have to do amniotic membrane or give lubricants so that this is taken care of. So the complications could be intraoperative or post-operative, and I'm sure Dr. Sangwan has discussed this at length. So I would be showing you more of pictures and more of the videos. Post-operative, of course, can be recurrent, and you sometimes can have double-headed pterygia, which is primary or which can be secondary. And again, the complications can be vision-threatening or non-vision threatening. And there is this wonderful review article which is there on report by American Academy of Ophthalmology on the use of mitomycin C, especially because mitomycin C is supposed to cause scleral melts if it is used extensively and not used in the proper dosage. Then the vision-threatening complications could be, of course, iritis, delayed conjunctival epithelialization, scleral thinning or ulceration, and symblepharon formation. And these have been reported in literature to some degree. And then apart from this, there can be also delayed conjunctival epithelialization and symblepharon to the extent of 2 to 10%. And then there are non-vision threatening complications such as corneal Dellen, which again occurs with the use of mitomycin C as well, but interestingly has never been reported after amniotic membrane transplantation. Then there can be astigmatism, pyogenic granuloma, which has to be taken care of, and then the graft-related complications such as a graft which has retracted or contracted, or graft dehiscence, or graft edema, or an inverse graft which has been put, and then graft hyperemia. And this is just to show how a reverse graft with necrosis would look like. Now then there can be graft edema, and all these things have to be looked at post-operatively, preferably after staining it with the fluorescein, because that gives you insight sometimes into things which you cannot see without it. And you can have pyogenic granuloma such as this, and when you have it initially one can give topical steroids and see how it goes, and if it does not respond, then one has to do surgery. But it does occur because excessive conjunctival manipulation has occurred. Of course, bare sclera technique, which was so popular in the years much before the conjunctival autografts came, has a recurrence rate varying from 24 to 82%, and this does decrease after the use of conjunctival autograft and mitomycin C, and also the limbal autograft. And this is just to show how sometimes because of recurrent surgeries which has been undertaken in cases of pterygia, there can be a corneal haze such as this. So it is always important to behead the pterygium and to excise it right from its end after marking it with the Genesian violet. And then sometimes you may even have to do some amount of keratectomy or remove that haze, And this may be even coupled with if the haze is not too much, it is superficial. Some people have even done excimer laser to get rid of the haze, and this is, of course, then an autoconj is placed on this. Most of the times you can glue it, but there are times when you may have to suture it as well. Now again, okay, so this is not working. This is a large pseudo-pterygium in fact, and in this again the pseudo-pterygium area is marked, and this area which is bared is then covered with the amniotic membrane, because this amount of conjunctiva and the subfibrotic tissue is too much to be replaced by the autoconj. Then you can have double pterygia, double-headed pterygia. So it can be like this when it is a primary double-headed pterygia, which can be then excised. So one can do an autoconj for this, but if it is too much, then again we have to put amniotic membrane on it. And sometimes there can be surprises. You excise this double-headed pterygia, and these have to be addressed because it is involving the visual axis. Sometimes they can be sparing as well. And there have been times where beneath this, because previous surgeries have been undertaken, there was a case in which I found that there were bilateral perforations underneath this pterygia which was hidden. Then always the double-headed pterygia tends to be more extensive, more symptomatic, and involvement of the fornix is generally there, and they are difficult surgeries, and they may compromise on the limbal stem cells, and you may have to do limbal stem cell procedure in these cases, as opposed to the primary pterygia, which are less extensive and less symptomatic, and the fornices are usually free, and you can do a simple surgery of LCAT for these cases. So apart from this, there are other surgical options such as the split conjunctival grafting and the amniotic membrane grafting, which can be undertaken in these cases. So you have to basically take the conjunctiva, split it into two, and then use it on this side and this side as well to get rid of the pterygia. And of course, amniotic membrane comes to the rescue when there's too much of involvement of the limbal stem cells, as well as the extent of the pterygia is increased. Now this is just to show the results which are there, outcome analysis of amniotic membrane, and the results are quite good, although the recurrence rate is more as compared to the autoconj. Then for the double-headed pterygia, perfect technique has been described for pterygium, where you do excessive amount of dissection right going up to the fornices, and this has been advocated by Dr. Hurst, and I think I've just done a couple of these cases. The results are good, but of course the surgery is too extensive. Then conjunctival autograft versus amniotic membrane has shown that conjunctival autograft has fewer recurrences as compared to amniotic membrane, irrespective of the site of the replacement. And again, vertically split conjunctival autograft can be used, and people have modified it in various ways to get rid of the double-headed pterygia. Now this was a case that I was talking about, and I thought it was a double-headed pterygia, and in fact it had been planned for the removal of the pterygium itself, as followed by the lamellar procedure if required. But notice that there's a perforation which is present here, and the iris was adhering to the back of the cornea, and there was a perforation which was here, and iris was again adhering to the back of the cornea. So sometimes you can have surprises, especially when patient has had multiple surgeries for double-headed pterygia, and this was then followed by doing a full thickness penetrating keratoplasty, which was then sutured. Now topical mitomycin C, I'm sure has been talked by the previous speakers about its merits and demerits, and this was again a case where there was excessive perforation, thinning, and the area of the pterygia and the pseudopterygia was dissected, was removed, and again dissection on the area of the perforation was done in such a manner that we had lamellar graft which was present here, and a full thickness coverage of the area of the perforation. So sometimes the pterygia surgery can be really complicated, so this was followed by the application of the glue for surface to surface apposition and the sutures for edge to edge apposition. So this was in the post-op period, and then air bubble was also instilled to see that there is some chamber which is formed. Now this technique which I have described is the sutureless tuck-in scleroplasty, again after a pterygium surgery, scleral melt. So what is done in this case is that the peritomy is done in the area the conjunctiva is freed, and then with the help of the crescent blade, a pocket is made all around. And after making this pocket, one can either use a scleral tissue or even use a corneal tissue for this to fill up, and this is the scleral tissue which has been put. And because there was a pocket all around this is then tucked inside the edges of the pocket that was there, and again glue is applied to cause edge-to-edge apposition as well as surface-to-surface apposition, and this is the tuck-in scleroplasty for the scleral melts, and this is followed by the conjunctiva which is then placed over this, and then the bandage contact lens. So this was the pre-op picture, and this is the post-op picture in another case where scleroplasty, tuck-in scleroplasty was done. And again, this is at a later follow-up. You can't even make out where the graft is if you do it well. Then there can be surgically induced necrotizing scleritis after pterygium surgery. A rare thing, but it can occur and has been reported by Dr. Nikhil. And to conclude, I would say that pterygia is one surgery which is considered to be very simple, often given to residents to do it or fellows to do it. But I think if it gets complicated, it is the most difficult to handle. The complications of pterygia are very difficult to handle as opposed to the complications of other ocular surface surgeries, and so they are best addressed on the first attempt only by a surgeon who's good and who knows what he's doing, rather than all of these cases getting referred to you when they are getting complicated. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Namrata, for that extensive talk and very interesting cases. Do we have any questions from the audience? Anybody would like to ask anything? Everybody has understood everything?
Very good. Very, very good. Maybe everybody is tired to go and trying to go for the inauguration. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you to all my co-instructors for being a part of this instruction course with me. Thank you.
You're always prepared.
Thank you, ma'am. She's 4 and a half.